Hello, and welcome to the Megan Taylor Creator Podcast, a show for entrepreneurs looking to grow their business with digital marketing. In this episode, I'll be talking about content creation for beginners and how you can get started creating content today with my content creation framework. Let's get started. So in this episode, I just wanted to talk about content creation and how to get started creating content as a beginner, because I know that when you first start out, it can be really intimidating. Not only do you have the prospect of growing an audience from nothing, you might never have created content before. So I just kind of wanted to give people a framework, a guide that they can follow that's really simply laid out, so that if you wanted to do what I'm doing, which is creating a podcast for the first time, or creating a YouTube channel for the first time, or even just starting out blogging for the first time, you can follow these steps, and then that way you'll just be able to get the ball rolling without procrastinating, because you have an idea as to how to actually create content. But not only creating content and the process you need to go through to create different types of content, but how to actually create content that's valuable for your audience and valuable to you, because at the end of the day, if you're creating content for a business, you need to ensure that you're spending time wisely and you're prioritizing content that is essentially going to actually contribute to your business goals. So now that you've got an understanding of what we're going to talk about in this episode, let's just get straight into it and start talking about my content creation framework for beginners. So the first step to my content creation framework is to do some competitor research. And competitor research is especially important for those who are brand new to content creation, because it gives you an idea into the sort of content that does really well, but also it gives you an idea into content that you think might actually be missing, and places where there are just natural gaps for you to come and fill in the content that your competitors haven't yet created. Obviously, though you want to kind of emulate the success of your competitors' content in a way that's original and unique, because clearly they've done something right. They've clearly worked hard to essentially create value-packed content. And especially, for example, if you're creating content on Google or YouTube, SEO is obviously a part of that. So you will want to take that into account. But you also want to ensure that you essentially come at your content creation process and the content ideation process, which is the first step to creating content. You want to make sure that you come at it in a way where you're thinking about the ways that you can actually come at an angle that's been covered before from a completely different angle, because obviously you want to ensure that readers actually have a reason to click on your content that isn't just, hey, here's a piece of content that's already been written before and there's no real new value in there. We've only just written it because we want to rank in search. I think that's the completely wrong approach. And if you follow me on Twitter, then you'll know for sure that that's not how we do things here at Megan Taylor Creative. We actually follow the creative content marketing framework, which basically allows us to create a unique piece of content every time. And the competitor research should help you do that. It shouldn't be where you go to copy ideas. It should be where you go to generate new ideas and content topics that haven't been covered. I know that I look at lots of competitor blogs and I think, why didn't they cover this topic in a particular blog? And then I go, okay, well, I can just create my own blog post around that. So yes, the first step in my content creation framework is competitor research. Now that you've done some competitor research, you need to establish some goals that you can work towards. I think that goals with content creation are really important because they give you something to work towards and a reason to keep going, because creating content consistently, especially if you're a busy business owner, can be very challenging. Sometimes you may feel like you have no ideas, or you just don't have the time to create content. You just don't have the energy to create content, because at the end of the day, we're all human. So I would set some goals that you can work towards, and then that way you can plan content for a certain period of time to keep that steam going. And I would set new goals maybe every quarter. I like to do quarterly goals just because I don't think a month is enough to basically see success. I think it can take a long time for your content to start generating, basically for you to start seeing the fruits of your labor. So yeah, I would do a goal setting session using the SMART goal framework strategy, which I have some advice on in a recent blog post about creating a content strategy for a fintech startup. So if you're interested in that, I will also leave that in the show notes too. So yeah, that's my advice on setting goals for content creation. The next step to my content creation framework is to actually create some buyer personas. Now, if you already have an idea of who your target audience is from creating a content strategy, then you may be able to skip this step. But I still think that even if you do have buyer personas made prior to this, then it's a good idea to review them and see if you actually have all the information that you think you might need, because buyer personas are there to help you. They're there to ensure that whatever content you create, it is going to be targeted content and it is going to actually address those pain points and frustrations, and those are the things that are going to get your target audience to look at your content in the first place. So I would absolutely just go back, check to see if you've got all the correct details, so things like demographics, interests, age and gender, their occupation. So now that you've set goals, the next tip that I would give a new content creator is to create automated processes from the beginning. And the most efficient way to do this is to essentially create templates and to also create a content calendar. And with this content calendar, you should be able to store all of your templates in there, but also you want to store things like assets. So for example, if you have music for a podcast introduction, you want to store that in there just to make sure that you're not spending time searching for things as you're actually creating your content, when you could just have it all in one place and be easily accessible. Because again, we're busy, we're small business owners, and you want to spend as little time as possible on menial tasks. So just ensuring that you have those templates and a guide that you can follow when you sit down to create content, and then also having those assets in easy reach is just going to be so instrumental and so game changing. It's also going to come into play later when you start actually batch creating content, because batch creating really does require some planning in advance, but the process can be sped up when you kind of already know what you're going to do and when you have a direction for creating the content. The next step in my content creation framework for beginners is to create a content map. Now, I love talking about content maps, and I've done it with so many clients and also in so many blog posts that I've written previously, because it is such a invaluable tool for content creators, especially if you're creating content for your business. Because again, content needs to be strategic. There needs to be intent behind everything that you create. So if you're not creating content that helps to push the buyer's journey in some way, then how are customers going to take those actions that you want them to as they continue to learn more about your brand? How are they going to know where to go? So a content map is a visual that marketers like to use to understand what content serves which part of the buyer's journey. It is normally a table that's split up, and what you have is each stage of the buyer's journey at the top. So awareness, consideration and decision, and if you're really savvy, a retention stage as well for repeat and lifetime customers too. And then you will put each content idea into where it fits into the buyer's journey. So for example, an educational piece of content that is just purely for search and purely serves to answer someone's search query, that would likely go in the awareness stage. Whereas a case study, for example, could actually fit into either the consideration or decision stage, depending on the complexity of it. So yeah, I recommend creating a content map that you can use to to document this and to visualize how your content contributes to the buyer's journey. I also like to ensure as well that I'm not only focusing on content as separate pieces. I think the content map that you create can also help you understand how your content ties into one another a bit better as well. So I think that with a business website, it's critical to have content that actually ties into one another, is essentially a continuation, and also each piece of content essentially takes the user from one step to another step to the final step. So a content map will allow you to visualize how each piece does that. The next stage in my content creation framework is batch create, and this is where you get down and into the nitty-gritty of content creation. Batch creating is a bit of a controversial word. Some people love batch creating, other people hate it. As someone that really enjoys creating content and has made their entire career based around content creation, you can probably guess that I love batch creating because it's a chance for me to spend a few days basically doing what I love and creating content that I want to create. Obviously, as a marketing agency, I have a lot of projects that I work on that are specifically for the client and aren't necessarily content pieces that I would choose to work on, but I kind of get to make up for this, and on my batch creation days spend as much time as possible creating content that I actually want to create. And again, your content templates that you created should really help you throughout the batch creating process, because you'll be able to see exactly how you can keep your content consistent. I think while you can definitely experiment with different content formats and mediums, I think that it's good to have a specific format that you kind of follow, because people like consistency and they like things to be familiar, and obviously experimenting with different types of content that can kind of lead to maybe a drop in readership or viewership or listenership depending on what content you're producing. So just be wary that experimenting too much with different types of formats can create confusion and put off certain members of your audience. So if you are going to do it, I would do it strategically and on platforms where your following maybe isn't as big. And it's still in the growth stages, because then there's not going to be as much loss, if you will. Whereas if you're doing it on a big platform and you have a complete change of direction, then you might start to see a decrease in interest, which could impact revenue and things like that. Finally, the last part of my content creation framework is to have a review process. And I know that reviewing content is one of those tasks that a lot of business owners find very boring, especially if you're not data driven, although I would argue that every business owner should be data driven. But again, have a process for this. Your goals that you've set from the beginning should help you understand which data to focus on. And I would set up your data and analytics so that each month or each quarter, as discussed previously, you can go in, look at the data, digest it quickly and document it in the most efficient way possible, because there is a lot of data, especially on like native analytics platforms, that might not be so useful to you. So just be wary of that and be cautious of the fact that whilst I think that reviewing content is critical to understanding which pieces of content are performing better and which pieces of content just aren't resonating with your audience, approach it in a way that's going to save you time, and you just need to approach it in a way that's going to be more efficient for you. So that is everything for this episode of the Megan Taylor Creative Podcast. I really hope that you found it useful and that you now have a place to start if you're getting started with creating content for the first time. I know that it can be really overwhelming as a business owner to try and fit content creation into your other business and marketing activities. So if you did need someone to help you create content, or even just someone to sit down and discuss your strategy with, then please do contact Megan Taylor Creative. You can contact me on Twitter or Instagram. My handle is at Megan LJ Taylor on both platforms. Please feel free to contact me on my website website, the live chat messenger box over there, and obviously there's just the standard contact form that you can fill out as well if that would be more comfortable for you. And we can book in a discovery call for you to see how we can help you. And yeah, if you really enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or follow us on Spotify if that's where you're listening. The podcast is also available on YouTube, so please subscribe to our channel over there. And yeah, that's it. That's everything this week. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to the next one. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Megan Taylor Creative Podcast. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support the show, please head over to our Ko-fi page. I'll link that in the show notes. Additionally, please leave a review on Apple Podcast or follow us on Spotify or YouTube. This is a weekly show, so we'll check in with you next time. Bye!